welcome to this DGAP morning briefing on Russia's invasion of Ukraine. I'm Henning Hoff, Executive Editor of Internationale Politik Quarterly and part of the Internationale Politik editorial team, which is published by the German Council on Foreign Relations. Russian President Vladimir Putin's unprovoked illegal invasion of Ukraine enters its second week. It will likely become more bloody. Fierce, brave Ukrainian resistance has slowed the Russian advance on key cities in eastern Ukraine and the capital Kyiv. In turn, Russia has switched tactics and is now heavily bombarding civilian areas. While the first round of so-called peace talks on March the 1st brought no results, international pressure on Moscow is mounting. Unprecedented sanctions against Putin's Russia, coordinated among the European Union, the United States, and others, have started to hit Russia's financial system and wider economy. And yesterday, the UN General Assembly voted with a large majority to condemn Russia. Only Belarus, which maybe is no longer independent anyway, Syria, North Korea, and Eritrea voted with Russia. Meanwhile, Putin's threat with nuclear weapons constitutes a clear and present danger for his country's relations with NATO. This morning, we will assess the military situation on the ground and the initial impact of sanctions on Russia. We will also discuss the global reactions to Putin's war against Ukraine, not least the German government's announcement of unprecedented increases in defense spending last Sunday, which suggests that this war is a watershed event with profound consequences for the international order. To discuss all this and more, I'm joined by Dr. Andras Racz, Senior Fellow in the Security and Defense Program here at the German Council on Foreign Relations, who's a leading expert on the Russian military and who will give us a status report of what is presently happening on the ground in Ukraine and his assessment of what will likely follow. Good morning, Andras. We have also with us Dr. Christian Mölling, Research Director and Head of the Security and Defense Program at the German Council on Foreign Relations, who will share his views of the Western response and in particular the announcement by Chancellor Scholz to not only deliver weapons directly to Ukraine, but also to set up a special fund worth 1 billion euros for the Bundeswehr and to meet henceforth the 2% goal by NATO. And last but not least, we'll hear from Alena Epifanova, Research Fellow with the International Order and Democracy Program here in the German Council on Foreign Relations, who is inter alia an expert on the Russian IT sector. Alena will share her impressions of how Western sanctions have affected Russia so far, what the mood is like now in Moscow and other big cities, and how the Putin regime is reacting against civil society and what is left of a free media. Our speakers will talk about 6-7 minutes each. After a short discussion, I will then open the debate and we will try to get as many of you involved as possible. Please raise your hand or submit questions in the comments section, and I'll try to put them to
Hamburg.
This event is recorded and not free of sort of technical glitches, as we've just seen, and we will close sharply at 9:30 a.m. So without any further ado, let's turn to Andras for his assessment. The view is, I think, that the advance has slowed in eastern Ukraine and in the north, but in the south, which is a little underreported, it is actually successful. But I'm really curious to hear your views, Andras. Floor is yours.
Thank you, Henning. Good morning to all of you. Thank you for choosing DGAP for this Thursday morning. So in order to be as efficient as possible, I'm trying to share a map right now. This map reflects to the actual military situation as things stood yesterday midnight or today very early morning. So where we are. in the south, Russian forces managed to capture the first larger Ukrainian city, Kherson, the port city of Kherson. Kherson basically capitulated. It's right now firmly in Russian hands. Russian forces are heading towards further west, already encircled Mykolaiv, and trying to go around Mykolaiv in order to reach Odessa. This is an additional 120 kilometers road for them. Ukrainians have blown up a few bridges, so hopefully the Russian advance will be slow, particularly because going around cities, this is first echelon troops can do very easily, tracked vehicles, mechanized infantry, all that. But for logistics, for normal trucks, going around cities is a slow and dangerous endeavor. Still, here in the western basin of the Black Sea, the Russian objective clearly seems to be to isolate Ukraine from the Black Sea. On the eastern side of the Black Sea basin, Russia already managed to cut Ukraine off from the Azov Sea. The city of Melitopol fell after 1 day of defense. Compared to how open city Melitopol is, they did pretty well, but they fell after 1 day. Russian forces overrun the port city of Berdyansk and now have surrounded already Mariupol, the largest Ukrainian port city on the Azov Sea, a city of 450,000 people, a city that has been fortified in the last 8 years. So the siege of Mariupol is not going to be easy. So far, it seems to be that Mariupol is ready to fight, which means we will see a proper siege here with a grave level of suffering from the civilian population. Other sections of the Eastern Front are relatively calm. Russian separatist forces have not made much of an advance, except from Luhansk. Here we see an effort to encircle and cut off a few Ukrainian brigades. We will see how far that goes. The situation around around Kharkiv is increasingly serious. Russian forces have encircled Kharkiv, and while tank and mechanized formations keep heading westwards with the direction of Poltava, there is a sizable siege force rounded up around Kharkiv. The siege of the city with heavy artillery shelling, regular missile strikes started 3 days ago, and looks like that Russia is going for a real proper siege. I mean, Kharkiv is a city of 1.8 million people. Right now, the footage we have indicates that Russians are indiscriminately shelling residential areas. They are using cluster ammunition and also MLRSs, so Grad systems, Uragan systems, so such missile launchers which are notoriously inaccurate. Both the use of cluster ammunition, so they also use cluster ammunition, and both are constituting actually war crimes. So using cluster ammunition against the civilian population, also shelling residential buildings. Here, there doesn't seem to be any possibility that Ukrainian forces could relieve Kharkiv anytime soon. So here, basically what's happening to Kharkiv is kind of indicative to what is awaiting also Kiev. So siege of big cities. For going further north, the city of Sumy is still standing. Russian forces have encircled it, kept rushing forward with the strategic objective of reaching Kiev. As of today, it's highly likely that Russian forces will reach Kiev also from the east. Thereby they will nearly complete the encirclement of the capital. There is still possible to go in from the south, but all the northern routes are fully and completely cut. Another interesting detail, the city of Chernihiv, which Russians plan to overrun on day one, is still standing and inflicting heavy losses to the invading Russian forces. Here, the terrain, thick forest, lots of small villages inside the forest, is very beneficial for the Ukrainian defenders. Russia has apparently underestimated the resistance of Chernihiv. Most important, of course, is the situation around Kiev. Yesterday, we saw the first ever Ukrainian counterattack, a successful counterattack starting from east of Zhytomyr. They managed to push back Russian forces. The supposed objective was to slow down or ideally prevent the encirclement of Kiev. Still, the large Russian supply convoy, which has been in the news for 2-3 days, is slowly reaching Kiev, and it's quite likely that Russia is preparing to lay a real siege on the Ukrainian capital. Just a few words about the scales. Kiev is a city of 2.7 million people, together with the agglomeration of 3.5 million. So far, around 600,000 people left Kiev, meaning around 70–75% of the population is still in the city. Dear colleagues, a city of such size has not been sieged in Europe since the Second World War. So what we are going to see here is an immense humanitarian catastrophe, a disaster for the population of Kiev. Last remarks from my side. There are news about logistical problems from the Russian side. They are suffering heavy losses due to the bad maintenance, very low morale, and also skillful ambushing tactics of the Ukrainians. Still, the failure of Russia's initial blitzkrieg plans, it does not mean that Russia would lose. It only means that Russia is adopting its plans, Russia is modifying its plans, but the strategic objectives are the same. Only the means pursuing those strategic objectives became different. So right now, as Henning Hoff rightly said, they are going to lay sieges to all the resisting cities. We see additional heavy artillery moving in from Russia. So really, really terrible days are to come for the civilian population of the encircled cities. So that's where I'm at the beginning. And if there are any questions, I'm happy to answer them. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andras. Maybe just one quick comeback. The role of air power has puzzled many Western observers. Why is Russia still not sort of having air superiority? Or is that a false view, or does sort of air power not play such a big role anyway?
They clearly have air superiority. They don't have full air dominance. Some elements of the Ukrainian Air Force are still functional. They are able to conduct, I'm sorry to say so, but largely symbolic resistance. But the whole Ukrainian radar network and air traffic control network is taken down. And without the functioning radar network and air traffic control, your few fighters can make a few takeoffs, can do some situational fighting, but no proper coordination is possible. And again, the number of aircrafts they have still operational is minuscule. What's more important from the Ukrainian side are the Turkish-made TB2 Bayraktar drones. Ukraine reportedly received an additional shipment of Bayraktars, and they are using it very precisely to attack advancing Russian columns. When it comes to Russian air power, in the beginning of the offensive, they seem to show some self-restraint. However, right now the situation in Kharkiv is illustrating that now most probably they will use air power much more intensively than they have done previously, including the indiscriminate bombing of civilian settlements.
And one other quick question, delivery of weapons, be it from Germany or other sort of European sources, do they actually reach the front line? There were reports that some of the German weaponry actually has reached it.
I've seen also these reports. I'm not sure about the front line. However, many of the weapon shipments are already in Ukraine, and this is confirmed. So they will reach the front line probably in 1–2 days. And the siege of Kiev is not going to be short. I mean, something between 4 to 6 weeks. And these Western-made weapons, particularly in the hands of well-motivated people, can be highly efficient in urban combat. And even though Ukraine has never used the Panzerfaust 3 before, so there is not enough time for properly training the people for these weapons. Still, if simply they learn to basically fire it, it's already much better than nothing. So my uninformed guess is that we will see the first German weapon deliveries in the front line in a few days from now, maximum.
Thank you very much, Andras. Let's turn to Christian now with his assessment of how the West has responded so far, and especially your take, Christian, on the significance of what the German government has announced on Sunday in terms of increased defense spending. Floor is yours, Christian.
Yeah, thanks, Henning. Thanks for putting this together, and good morning, everybody. I'm trying to be very brief. Let's take first the NATO side. NATO has been clever in not responding to the Russian threat or pressure that has been put up by the announcement that nuclear weapons are put on a higher alert status. I think that was a good thing. I think it is widely heard that Russia is announcing a kind of a red line. However, it's pretty unclear what Putin exactly expects now. But we also have seen these types of signaling towards other countries in the past, especially in the first invasion of Ukraine in 2014. So also the US has stopped a regular test of their intercontinental ballistic missiles, the Minimum 3, just to not further escalate the situation. I think there's high consciousness in NATO what the risks are in such a hot fighting situation, to not to escalate between several nuclear powers, because it's not only the US on the Western side, but also French and British who are nuclear powers, and on the other side, the Russian. That on this part. I'm happy to answer questions later on. On the European side, on the EU side, one has to say, we have seen a kind of a puzzling moves over the last week. On the one hand, the announcement that the European Union is ready to deliver weapons and especially fighter jets, which I would say is possibly not fully thought through, as well as not the very emotional announcement that Ukraine could or should join the European Union that was made by the President of the European Commission, Mrs. von der Leyen. Why? Because first of all, this is not a kind of an alternative to NATO, because the European Union itself has a kind of an alliance clause which binds members to come to help when one country is under attack. So there's no kind of a, how to say, a non-military part to this discussion. There's also a military part to such an alliance, which would immediately then bring in also NATO. So we are kind of back to square one. Second, what you would, there is a kind of a typical procedure that needs to be kept for new candidates, and that's the institutional part of it. Plus, there's politics. If such a large country like the Ukraine would enter into the European Union, some of those who currently get money from the European Union would have possibly to pay more into the European Union's pocket. And I guess this would cause immediate blocking by some of the European member states. So I think this is something where the diplomatic part currently by the European Union has room for improvement. Let me come to the situation in Germany and the kind of Zeitenwende that has been announced on Sunday by the Chancellor and by other members of the government, and especially what has caused a lot of waves, the discussion about the money that is going into defense. Just to be pretty clear, it's not only 100 billion that are going into a special fund, it is also that the rest that is needed to reach the 2% of NATO criteria will also be spent. So it's a combination of two things. However, the most interesting part here is still, of course, the 100 billion extra fund. Why are we doing this? This is because to create kind of certainty for longer term multinational projects. That is the sole perspective so far why we should have this fund. To understand that reason a little bit, German budgets, like many other budgets, are just annual budgets. However, if you want to invest into a long-term project, you need certainty that what you start today, you have the money for in 10 years. This is something that we currently don't have. So this extra fund will basically offer this opportunity. So the overall funding perspective, the 2%, the extra money in the annual budget, plus the special fund, ensure three things. We have an appropriate financing of the German armed forces against the always increasing costs of their operation. The second is we will be able to fulfill the long-term existing commitments that Germany has made, but which just have been hollow. They have never been answered in full vis-a-vis NATO. And third, it's, as I said, it's creating a security with regard to planning, and that those defense projects, and especially procurement projects that we want to conduct, can be conducted in the future. So the overall message is, this is not about champagne. This is about just filling the many empty water glasses that Germany has left over the last years. Just to give you one figure, the underinvestment of Germany over the last 20 years has been 90 billion euros. And and within this 90 billion, more than 30 billion just on defense procurement and armaments. So this is what we're going to build afterwards. What is still open here in the question is, how will the 100 billion be spent? This has implications for the debt brake, as well as for future governments, because if you spend the money very fast, then a future government will basically face the challenge to make up for once the special fund is over. And you will have, if you're a future government, you will have to manage a tremendous increase of the defense budget if you still want to keep the 2%. So from 2026 on, if you do a short-term spending on the 100 billion fund, you would have to see an increase of 20 billion again to keep the 2% line. This is a lot of information. We're just finishing a PowerPoint slide on this with 10 slides on it. You will get this later on if you see DGAP on Twitter or other sites, so that you get a little bit more on information on that. Just to be clear, it is a watershed change which really enables Germany on the resource side and possibly on the capability side. What still needs proof is, do we really mean it? So it's brilliant to have more capabilities. If you're not willing to use it, then you basically are talking to kind of empty shells, so to say, because they have no political meaning. The political investment that we're making and the financial investment into political means need to be understood. And this, I think that the mental change, that is still the biggest challenge to the Zeitenwende. Thanks very much.
Many thanks, Christian. Just one quick comeback. Sort of in your view, how long would it take to, if there's initial money is spent on sort of on equipment and sort of having more and larger forces properly equipped, how long sort of, or what kind of time frame are we talking about if we want a Bundeswehr which is sort of, we can actually put for purposes of deterrence, not to speak of others, sort of, how long would it take in your view? Yeah,
to fill all the empty glasses, it would take 10 to 15 years. So from therefore, the special fund, if it is stretched over 10 years, that would be a clever move. Also, you have to take into account, at the beginning, it's different to spend so much money because there is pain in growth, so to say. Now, everything has to grow, and the ability to absorb the money in the defense bureaucracy, in the defense industry, and then later in the armed forces is something that has to basically increase. So it would be not clever to spend all the money at the beginning on long-term projects. However, there is a lot of equipment simply missing, as well as ammunition is missing. Just simple ammunition is not there. So we would not be able to fight a high-intensity war at this time. So 10 to 15 years, which also has implications for the question of how long do we need support by the US.
Thank you very much, Christian. Now let's go to Alena for her take on how sort of Western sanctions. Christian mentioned them, very, very sort of tough sanctions, especially targeting Russia's financial sector. There are sort of reports of people sort of trying to get cash out and cash machines. There's sort of at the same time we hear sort of Putin regime reacting by becoming more repressive. Sort of if you could sort of give us your impression, your view on sort of on the initial impact of sanctions on Russia.
Yeah, thank you, Henning, and good morning, everyone. I think what we see now is Russia's disintegration from everything, what have been its bridges to the global world and especially to the West for the last 30 years after the collapse of the Soviet Union. So Russia was quite well integrated into the economic financial institutions technologically, also in the global internet, and also people-to-people exchange. So now we see that Vladimir Putin did a move which leads to the isolation, to disintegration of Russia. And I think we see the end of unique era in which states what were once adversaries in the Cold War found fields for mutual beneficial cooperation. So now this is the end of such an era. This is the end of Russia's integration in the global institutions, or in the Western institution, I think. And we observed a lot of different sanctions introduced from the Western countries, and especially in the field of economic financial relations, and probably the most painful measure was the move to freeze the assets of the central bank of the Russian Federation. So we talked about it in our previous briefing last week. So what the economists call Fortress Russia, which has about $630 billion worth of reserves. Now looks like it's not that super stable, this fortress. And so these sanctions have hindered Russia's ability to use its foreign exchange reserve to protect itself from the sanctions. So it was actually the initial plan of the Kremlin to use these reserves to stabilize its economy. And so it was actually the preparation of Russia for such a war, for such a scenario. But it seems like they didn't expect that the West will do this move. But very shortly, the sanctions practically neutralize large parts of these reserves, because most of them are held in the form of assets what allocated abroad, and in the United States, in the EU, and also other Western countries. So it means if these assets cannot be used, they severely undermine the Central Bank of Russia's ability to fend off the sanctions. So it means, so now this package, what was prepared to protect itself from sanctions, is actually in question. I highly recommend you to read a paper recently published by our colleague Shahin Bali, where he explains how such mechanism works, and also what it means for Russia in the long term. When it comes to technological sanctions, I think this is very new in a situation in such a conflict, and also very significant for Russia, because also here Russia is integrated into the global internet, and Russia's economy and also daily life is built on Western technologies. So, and now we see practically exodus of Western countries, mostly because of technological sanctions introduced by the US administration, but also because the Russian market has become highly toxic. And it's also now a matter of their reputations for serious global tech players if they're going to work with a country which is in the war, in the bloody war with Ukraine. So, and in the last days, we saw that Washington put pressure on technological companies by applying the so-called foreign direct product rule. We also talked about it a little bit last time. So this is a very powerful mechanism which allows the US to reach beyond borders and control technological products made outside the country if they are designed or manufactured using American technologies. And we must know that all advanced semiconductors on the planet are made with US software or tools. So it means that Russia is now denied access to chips, to semiconductors, which is, you know, the core of the economy, of the military, of today's countries. And Russia does not have its own semiconductor manufacturers. And it's now in trouble to find a substitution, which will be very, very difficult because, as I said, all advanced semiconductors are produced with US technologies. So these measures led to a situation when the Taiwan semiconductor manufacturing companies, practically the world's largest, contract chip maker said that it will comply with the new export controls. And for Russia, it means that most processor manufacturers will not have supplies of chips because they all rely on the Taiwanese chips manufacturer. And also it means that a lot of other industries in Russia will not have the ability to produce several arts of products within Russia. And also this move of the United States led to the situation that other companies stopped their export to Russia, and such as Intel or Nvidia. And we also must know that the major part of Russia's business and also state authorities rely on technologies from these companies. We see in the last days also a major exodus of Western technologies and Western companies from Russia, such as Nokia and Ericsson. So they said they stop supplies of the telecom equipment to Russia. It's practically mean almost a full stop for 5G development for Russia, but also to other telecom equipment market, which also highly dependent on Nokia and Ericsson products. Apple stopped selling products in Russia yesterday. Oracle, also one of the biggest software companies, said that it stopped operating in Russia. So practically the country is now effectively denied access to semiconductors and other high tech, which is critical to its advancement and also for its economy. When it comes to people, I think it's also important that we see that also a lot of exchange programs and also people-to-people contacts are now also cut. Like practically a lot of programs are stopped now, and especially cooperation with state universities and also other organizations are now on hold. And yes, and what you, Henning, asked about the internal situation, it's mixed. I think we can't say that the whole country is now protesting against the war, because as I observed, the Kremlin still controls the official narrative about the war. So they, from one side, try to prevent independent information about what's going on in Ukraine, what the Russian army practically doing there. And at the same time, they effectively spread the official information about the so-called denazification and liberation of Ukraine. So, and we don't know actually how many people support this. So some survey says that it's about 60% which supports the military operation or the war, but I would say it's very difficult to say, because we can't rely on a survey in such an authoritarian country as Russia, because people usually say that they think they are supposed to say. But at the same time, we see major protests in very different cities of Russia, and people go into the street even if they know there will be major repressions against them. And we see already more than 7,600 people were detained just because without any call, they took to the street with placards saying "No war." And we see also a major repressions against independent media, so against every website and every social media platform which independent information. And just 2 days ago, also sign of the Russia's way to the West, radio station Echo of Moscow was blocked in Russia, which opened in the 1990s and was kind of a symbol of the new Russia. So it was blocked 2 days ago, along with the independent channel Dost. Yeah, and also we expect that Medusa, one of the major independent media in Russia, will be blocked within next days. And also they have troubles to to finance themselves because of the SWIFT sanctions. They can't we can't have donations from Russian citizens because so now this way of payment is blocked. Yeah, so we see a lot of repressions in the media space, in the internet, but also against people who try to say that they're against the war and they want the end of this war.
Thank you very much, Alena. I mean, with the view on the clock, I sort of I think I go immediately to a couple of questions which have been put to us. Mostly, I think, concern maybe Andras in the first instance. There's a question of a humanitarian corridor. Is that something which is sort of, do you see? Also, the question of a no-fly zone. You responded to it already in the chat, but maybe because it's a thing which comes up quite frequently, or has come up in the recent days. Maybe you can sort of explain why it is most very unlikely that such a no-fly zone will be created, and maybe generally to the whole panel, sort of a question by our Vice President Rolf Nika, who asked sort of, do you see any sort of off-ramping sort of avenues opening for Putin, or is there is your sense that this will go on and that there's no interest at all on the part of the Russian president to somehow sort of put on the brakes and maybe, I mean, there peace talks, so-called, again today, whether they offer any chance of a sort of, at least a sort of rewinding of what is happening recently. Andras, first, please.
Thank you. Regarding the humanitarian corridor, our colleague from the migration program, Ms. Alia Fakhri, has just replied. I read it out. Regarding humanitarian corridors, the World Health Organization and NGOs have called for the opening of a corridor, not for evacuations, but for medical and food supplies to get in. The Ukrainian government is supposedly negotiating the opening of such corridor. So at the moment, so that's where we are. On the no-fly zone, I think it's highly unrealistic, particularly in NATO framework. Anyways, deploying our jets into Ukrainian airspace, it would mean that we deploy our jets into the airspace of an ongoing Russian military operation. This is a highly risky endeavor from the military side, and from the political side, I do not really see the coherence, the necessary political support from NATO side in order to authorize such a mission. The US government clearly stated that at the moment, no-fly zone is not an option. And from the military technical perspective, imposing a no-fly zone over Serbia, imposing a no-fly zone over Iraq. So if necessary, suppressing Serbian or Iraqi air defenses like we did back in those wars is fundamentally different than imposing a no-fly zone over a territory where the Russian army is operating with Russia's formidable air defense and air forces systems. So instead, what seems to be happening is that more and more air defense weapons are getting supplied to Ukraine. These are, of course, short-range, shoulder-fired missiles. With the help of these, Ukraine would be able to significantly hamper the operations of Russian aircrafts, as long as they fly low, and of Russia's helicopters. When real urban combat would start, urban warfare would start, Russia's helicopters could play a role, and the Russian military thinking helicopters play an integral role in urban warfare. But if there are enough air defense missiles on the ground, then they won't. So instead, by delivering these air defense weapons, my impression is that we are trying to enable Ukraine to impose a no-fly zone on her own. I mean, simply by reaching the necessary density of air defense weapons on the ground. Of course, this is much less than a no-fly zone, but at least helps Ukrainians a bit.
Thank you very much. Christian, do you want to come in as well? There's sort of, you already said sort of how so incongruent, especially the EU's response has been so far. But we also hear that Germany at least will continue with weapons deliveries. Maybe you can explain also sort of what kind of a big break that is. I mean, the Greens particularly say it's justified under Article 51 of the UN Charter. And it's not really a new thing, but it is, I think, and maybe you can explain a little more sort of what it also means for the sort of security culture in Germany, maybe.
Yeah. So yeah, there is the news from this morning that there's more weapons delivery. I guess we have to wait a little bit because there are questions about the quality of what is going to be delivered, not in terms of what it can shoot down, but whether it's technically operational. But that's something we shouldn't speculate about that. But the other point is, I think, a very valid point, because given the fact that Germany has to or wants to put up a new national defense export law, the current situation is rather instructive, because we have for a long time excluded the Article 41 of the UN Charter, which is the right for self-defense and the right also of others to support countries in their self-defense. There's not a kind of an obligation, but there's the right to do so. You leave your point of neutrality at that point, that's true. But that is something where you would say it's also important where you stand in history from a German point of view. So I would see this as a step towards, as you said, change in security culture. Let's see. I mean, changes in security culture take a long time, but it could be the first steps into this direction, especially if the Greens accept that it's not only kind of that restriction is not the only word, but kind of, how to say, appropriateness is what we basically have to go. Then we are moving into a defense export policy that is much more driven by security considerations than it is by normative positions. We definitely don't want to deliver weapons because weapons are in general a bad thing. This perspective is challenged anyway because of the huge defense budget package that we see. But to be pretty clear, this is not a no-brainer. There will be a lot of debate in Germany over the next month on whether this has been the proper move, and there will be, I guess, a kind of a swing back by those who have been traditionally against more defense and against defense exports as well, simply for two reasons. One is an ideological reason, and the second one is a political power reason. People have built their political legacy on the peace and pacifism argument. If they scrap this, how can you trust these people who have for 20 years argued the only thing that we can do is be neutral and pacifist towards Russia and throw any other country in Central and Eastern Europe under the bus if Russia wants that from us?
Thank you very much. And to Alena, maybe also a question which has popped up is sort of what if Putin would sort of be, I don't know, well, is there a palace coup? We discussed this last week. The general view is that it's rather unlikely, but sort of is there a sort of second tier of a Russian leadership who could, a person who could take over if it is felt that Putin has gone too far and that his actions actually hurt Russia to such an extent that it's no longer sort of viable to go on? And maybe the flip side of that is sort of where would Putin stop? Is Moldova also threatened? Is sort of the rhetoric coming from the Kremlin sort of very concentrated now on Ukraine, or is it sort of more presented as a first step in a grander design, which sort of doesn't stop at Ukraine, but will go on in terms of recreating a Russian sphere of influence in Europe?
Thank you, Henning. Maybe to the first question, it's difficult to say so how the regime will react on the pressure, what we observe now. I think what we are saying now is that so Mr. Putin or his allies were miscalculating about several things. So about how Ukraine will react, how its own the West will react with the sanctions. So I think now they see a lot of pressure, and as we also already discussed, the blitzkrieg actually has failed. So, and now it's unclear, so to what extent the oligarch or the people who are economically involved in this regime will react. So we see some reactions from several people saying we're against this war, or several people pulling out from boards of banks or other international institutions. And but at the same time, we can't know to what extent the security services will profit from this war. And from my point of view, they are profiting a lot from this war, and they're rather consolidating now in this situation. And this is very difficult to get through, this very firm construction which has been built in the last years, I think. And from this point of view, I can't say to what extent we can expect some change of the regime. It can't come from the street, I'm afraid. So I can expect more people on the street, but it's not how the regime is going to change. So they are very well prepared to introduce even more repressions, to introduce even more pressure on the society. And to the second question, where Russia will stop, I think it will stop where the resources for the army will end. And we don't know what Mr. Putin thinks and wants, but it's from his speeches or his behavior in the last days and weeks, we see that he's trying to take a revenge to the West and practically use the terms of reshaping the world order, of restoring Russia's power, of restoring the just world order. So in these terms, I think, unfortunately, we can expect also other attacks on other post-Soviet countries. I'm not a military expert, and I don't know to what extent Russia's military sector and Russian army is able to fulfill Mr. Putin's ambitions. I doubt that it can fulfill these ambitions, and that's why I think the sanctions and a lot of pressure on Russia's financial economic sector is very important here.
Thank you very much, Alena. And I should maybe point out again, you're also allowed to raise your hand and ask your question personally. We have 13 minutes left, not too much, but maybe we can squeeze in one or two before we close. Andras, maybe you could also address this sort of, where does it stop, sort of, maybe from a more military point of view, how easy would it sort of to go on and go on? We have the impression, or my impression is that Russian forces are rather inadequate to do much beyond what they are trying to do, which is sort of terribly enough already. But maybe you could sort of enlighten us on what your take is in terms of where it goes, and also maybe to the peace talks question. Sort of, so far Russia has presented a very hard line, which is basically unacceptable to the Ukrainians. Or have you noticed any sort of any change there, that the sort of the demands on the Russian side are getting more reasonable?
Thank you. Regarding the peace talks, so far I haven't seen the agenda of the second round of talks, so I can talk only about the first round of talks. Russia delegated Minister of Culture Medinsky. If there is a person who is unfit and unable to have an agreement with Ukraine, that's actually Medinsky. So in the first round of talks indicated that Russian positions have been absolutely unchanged. Moreover, Russia timed exactly on the time of the negotiations a series of serious missile strikes on Kiev, just to put pressure on the Ukrainian delegation. My uninformed guess is that yesterday news about former Ukrainian president and convicted criminal Viktor Yanukovych, the news about his presence in Minsk as the next president of Ukraine, that would be the Russian plan. This is also a tool to put pressure on the Ukrainian delegations ahead of the second round of negotiations. Good news, Yanukovych will not be president, period. When it comes to Russia going any further, I don't think so. Militarily, they already used up significant parts, more than 50% of the force they have in Ukraine. We have information that Russia is moving in additional forces from other parts of the Russian Federation, simply because they are already overstretched and slowed down in Ukraine. Even if they manage to win over Ukraine, even if they manage to take Odessa, a city of 1 million, that's a big place, and link up to Moldova, I don't think that Russian forces would be either in the shape or actually in the need to continue and overrun Moldova. The historical patterns of Tsarist Russian imperialism, Soviet imperialism, contemporary Russian imperialism, it's always the same. Once they conquer a territory, they sit on it. They wait for a few years, stabilize their rules, establish their firm control, regain their strength, and only when that's done, that's when they move forward. I don't think that they would take up a direct confrontation with a NATO country. I mean, that's anyway suicide. So the only country in question remaining is Moldova. But if, and again, this is a big if with capital letters, if they manage to take Odessa and link up to Moldova, in Moldova, there is the separatist conflict of Transnistria. If Russians reach the Ukraine-Moldova border, they would be able to beef up Transnistria militarily and thereby put really massive pressure on the Chisinau leadership without actually overrunning Moldova. So they would not even need to overrun Moldova. That's my short take.
Thank you very much. Christian, please, and then we have two questions by Felix Klein and Jana Idris.
Yeah, but very, very short, because being aware of the German context and discourse, and that's especially very much the German side, so please don't take this as a criticism. These are no peace talks. This is trying to bring Ukraine to capitulate. This is capitulation, that what they want. They should resign with a gun on their head. This is not on equal level, just to be pretty clear on this. If we talk about denazification, this is about killing political leadership in Ukraine. So we should be very aware of not using Russian narratives, especially not because the German public has been overwhelmed by this narratives and buys into it. And just to give you one explanation, the whole discussion about NATO want to go east again was put up by Putin. And we merrily picked it up, and we had another 2 weeks of discussions where we just said, oh, look, Russia has agreed to NATO going east in 1997 with the NATO-Russia Founding Act. Everything has been managed by that. Just to be pretty clear, these are things that will come up again and again. Please be very aware and sensible that we are not speaking kind of in the name of the wrong people. Thanks.
Thank you, Christian. I always sort of implied my peace talks, but you're right. One can't be careful enough. Felix Klein, please. Your question.
Thanks for the great event. I would like to ask about the medical supply for the Ukrainian people. As far as I understand, there's no corridor established for medical and food supply outside of Ukraine. So how are the reserves right now, and how do people taking care about themselves?
In short, supplies are gradually running out. This is particularly true for medical oxygen to be used in hospitals. First, oxygen is running out, thereafter everything else will also run out.
Thank you. That was a quick question. I don't know whether anyone wanted to come in on that, but maybe we take Jana Idris also now.
Yes, good morning. I hope the question hasn't been already discussed because I came late. I just wanted to ask you, Andras, how serious the threat of a nuclear war is, or of a nuclear attack by the Russians.
On Ukraine?
Not only on Ukraine.
Personally, I'm, as strange as it sounds, I'm quite optimistic about that. I mean, Russian military is composed of serious, well-trained weather professionals. So for them, starting a nuclear war against NATO is suicide. Everybody knows it. Even if the Russian president would give such an order, but we know about the chain of command of how Russian nuclear forces are actually operated. Most probably, such an order would not go through, not without at least the tacit consent of the military. But again, I'm not a nuclear expert. The things I know suggest this. And using a nuclear weapon against Ukraine, right, any kind of strategic nuke would also contaminate Russia and kill a hell of a lot of Russian speakers. And when we go to tactical nuclear weapons, I mean smaller scale nuclear weapons, if there is anything positive about the siege laid on major Ukrainian cities, is that using a tactical nuke would fry thousands of Russian troops as well. So in short, I think that this is pretty much excluded. I mean, the nuclear saber-rattling rhetoric that Putin has been using, it's an old strategy. In Russian military science, there is even a name for that. They call it informaционное сдерживание, meaning information deterrence. So if I speak credibly enough that I'm ready to use force, then I can achieve the desired effect simply by scaring you without actually using force. So I think this talk about nuclear weapons is information deterrence at the moment, hopefully not much more. So again, I'm optimistic on that.
Thank you very much. There was also a question in the talk, sort of in how far Russia's intervention in Syria is sort of indicative of what is happening or what is coming to Ukraine's bigger cities. I mean, some telltale signs are already there, sort of bombing hospitals and train stations yesterday evening sort of already sort of speak for themselves, I think. But maybe you want to comment on that as well. And maybe for a last round, sort of looking beyond Russia, Ukraine, sort of, if you look at the wider spectrum, what sort of role do you see for other powers to have an impact in whatever way? There was a sort of suggestion that China might come in as sort of bringing about sort of some sort of de-escalation, offering itself as a sort of vermittler. I'm sorry, I can't think of the English word right now. Is this something which you found tangible? Maybe first to Andras on the Syria question.
Thank you. Just one sentence. I think while the Syrian analogy is adequate, probably the analogy of Grozny is even better, because there is a difference. Russian army did not intend to actually siege and take Syrian cities. So for them, bombing from the air was enough. The analogy of Grozny, what happened to Grozny in the First and Second Chechen War, where Russian forces sieged the cities and intended to take the cities, is probably more accurate, which is even worse news for the population of Kharkiv and Kiev, and also Mariupol.
Thank you very much. And maybe I think we try to squeeze as many questions in as possible. Maybe since we have got only 2 minutes left, I would give it sort of in an inverse order, starting with Alena. Sort of, what is your sense of what will be happening in the next couple of days, and sort of will there kind of will China or some other power come in as a broker and as sort of as have some influence on the dynamics we are seeing right now?
Yeah, thank you. This is exactly my very big question regarding technologies, because Russia tried to build so-called sovereign internet and to be digitally independent. And now it looks like it doesn't have any choice but to rely on Chinese technologies. I'm still wondering how it will happen. And for sure, China is not able to substitute all the technologies Russia will need after the Western companies left Russia. But it will mean practically also for the bigger picture, it's bad news when Russia and China will cooperate on the technological level and build so-called digital authoritarianism. And also observing and hoping that also Western countries will try to support the independent critical voices in Russia and independent media, because for now it's very crucial that also social media platforms such as Facebook and YouTube will remain operating in Russia, because for now it's a crucial channel to get the independent narrative what's going on in Ukraine. And also to deter the official denazification, so-called denazification narrative. So it's very crucial to support also these voices, to support opposition, to support the media.
Thank you very much. I think you broke up at the end, but I think we got the message. Christian, next.
It's difficult to say. I mean, András already made I think, a very good analysis of what the timing of the siege is. I guess the interesting question to me, from my point of view, I don't have an answer to that, is how fast will the sanctions basically trickle down into the Russian economy and hit those people who are offering power to Putin? So if there's a kind of a convergence at the significance level of the impact of the sanctions is fast enough, and the siege holds long enough, and Zelensky is not captured, then I see that a significant improvement of the negotiation power of the Ukrainians possibly. But that's something I'm just guessing from afar. I'm by no means an expert on these Russian internal affairs. But that would be kind of trying to give a hold. The other point I'd like to make here, I think on all the kind of how would you say this in German? You would say Apologeten, all those people who kind of want to bring in appeasement to these things. There is nothing to negotiate currently. So there is even nothing we can offer, and we shouldn't offer anything to Russia, or at least not to Putin, because this is also part of negotiation, to not offer something for a long time and then see how the other behaves. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Christian. And last final word to Andras, your sense of how this is going to develop and whether China can play a role.
I don't know anything about China. On my luckier days, I find China on the map, but that's it. This is not going to be a quick war. Now it's quite clear. We know for a fact that originally Russia planned the Blitzkrieg. They wanted to finish up Ukraine in 4 days. Now that failed, but again, I just repeat what I said. The fact that Russia's initial plans failed doesn't mean that Russia is giving up. Russia is just going to use different methods, more systematically, in a better organized way, and with a lot more bloodshed. But the Russian objectives remain the same.
Thank you very much. And with that, I sort of thank you all for attending this morning. Sorry, we have overrun just by 2 minutes. Thank you all for coming. We will continue this very likely next week, same time, same place. And hopefully we have maybe some better picture, but that is maybe vastly optimistic on my part. So thank you very much for coming. Please join me in thanking our 3 speakers, and see you soon again here at the German Council on Foreign Relations. Good morning. Thank you very much.